everyone and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. In this video, we will be learning how to go into orbit. So let's start our save. And as you can see, we're in the KSC, everything's exactly as we left it. Let's go to mission control. As you can see, we don't have any contracts, we completed them all last episode. So there's this contract over here, Orbit Kerbal, and we're gonna accept it. So let's see what do we have to do. So we need to achieve a stable orbit around Kerbal. All you need to do is throw yourself at the ground and miss. Fly a vessel up and out of the atmosphere and accelerate parallel with the surface until you're in a stable orbit to achieve this goal. And this nets us 48,000 funds, 6 science and 10 reputation. So let's just see if there's any other contracts worth taking. There are none. So let's go into the R&D to see how far our tech tree has progressed, just so you guys can follow along. These are the tech nodes we have unlocked. Unfortunately, we cannot have the LV-909 Terrier engine as we had too few science to unlock it. It would have been nice in a mission like this. Maybe there's a part testing contract that allows you to take it. In part testing contracts, they temporarily give you the part until you're done testing it. Unfortunately, there are none. So let's go into the VAB. So we're back in the VAB. Let's take our usual Mark 1 command pod. We can grab a parachute so that we don't forget it. And we can take a look at some of our newly unlocked parts. A heat shield and a decoupler. So we're going to be coming in from high orbital velocities. So we're going to need the heat shield on our way back. Put that decoupler on there. And let's start looking at some of the liquid fuel engines. We have the LV-T30 Reliant liquid fuel engine and the So first let's look at the LV-30 Reliant engine. Jebediah Cummins Junkyard. And as you can see, it generates 7 electric charge per second. It's not a cargo part. And you can see its thrust values here, how much liquid fuel it consumes. An engine ISP is how efficient it is at sea value. It has 240 kilonewtons of thrust in the vacuum and 205 kilonewtons at sea level. However, if we look at the swivel, there are a few extra things here. As usual, everything seems to be less than the Reliant engine, even its mass is more. However, you might see this gimbal. Gimbal is a way of attitude control. So gimbaling allows you to control the direction of your craft. There are also reaction wheels which produce torque to turn your vehicle from here and there. Unfortunately, we don't have any unlocked, and the only reaction wheels we have are in the capsule. As you can see up on top, reaction wheels. And for a kind of rocket we're going to be building today, they just aren't big enough. So we will have to go with the swivel. So now let's talk a little bit more about delta V. Delta V is the total change in velocity. It indicates how much you can change your delta V by. For a normal orbital mission, we will need around 3,800 meters per second of vacuum delta V. However, as we are still beginning, we're still learning, we will go for around 4,000 meters per second of delta V. Delta V is not the same as acceleration, which is the change of velocity over time. Delta V is just the total change of velocity. It doesn't really matter how much time it takes. So let's start getting into the build. As you can see, we've already put up 4 fuel cans and a swivel engine, and that nets us 1,955 meters per second of delta V. However, that's on sea level. So using the delta V tools, maybe we'll add another fuel tank, or maybe not. Yeah, the bigger one will be better. We don't want our vessels getting too tall because it makes it a lot harder to control, especially at this stage of the game. We have a very high thrust to weight ratio, so we're gonna cut the thrust limiter down a little bit to make it more manageable. Yeah, around 1.3 works. Yeah, close enough. Everything's fine now, and as you can see, we have our contracts. Let's go into the Delta V tools and change it to vacuum, and suddenly we have 2800 meters per second of Delta V. Now this is good for our little orbiter. However, we will need some boosters to bring this into orbit. So we will take some radial decouplers, use two-way symmetry, put them on the sides. None of solid fuel engines aren't gimbalable, and we will need gimbaling for this mission considering we don't have reaction wheels. So let's not get into the solid fuel booster. Add on some more fuel tanks. You can use the Alt key to turn on the snap. And we will get our engine. Reliance produce more thrust. However, they do not have gimbaling, as I've already mentioned, so we're probably better off with the swivel. And that gives us a lot of Delta V, maybe a high thrust to weight ratio as well, so maybe a few more tanks. Still a high thrust to weight ratio, but we don't want this to become too tall. Maybe take off some tanks. We honestly have a really high Delta V, so we could probably afford to remove some tanks to save some mass. So let's do that. And now I'm going to introduce you to the tools. We have the place tool. Now I'm going to show you the move tool. Using the move tool, you can slide your boosters or anything up and down, and if it's not going up high enough, you can hold the shift key to move it up a little bit higher, like that. Now, as you can see, this isn't very aerodynamic. We're gonna need something to cover that up a little bit. So but first I'm going to show you the rotate tool. This we don't really need at the moment, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. You can move any item in the game around its different axes of rotation. And yeah, that's how it works. And finally we have the reroute tool, which is something I'll explain in the next episode or in a different episode. So let's get back into building. So we'll go into aerodynamics, grab some aerodynamic caps to cover that up, and I'm going to introduce you to the center of mass and aerodynamic overlay. Now in a normal rocket, you always want the center of lift or the aerodynamic overlay to be below the center of mass. And as you can see, if you put on some aerodynamic fins, that moves it down much less. And the center of lift is a bit closer to the center of mass. But we do want it below the center of mass, as much below the center of mass as possible. So we'll put some on either side on two-way symmetry on the boosters, and some more on the orbiter, as such. And as you can see, the center of lift is just barely below the center of mass. It would be nice if it could be a little bit less, like a little bit more below. Maybe we can do something about it. Moving that down doesn't help much. We want the center of mass closer to the middle of the vehicle, and decouplers, that just looks weird. So let's see, maybe we move the boosters up, and we don't want to move them too far up because the decoupler always separate more cleanly if the decoupler is near the top of the booster rather near the bottom. So yeah, let's save this, name it orbiter or orbit. One sec, it's not clicking. Oh, press place, get back in the place tool and name it orbiter. So we could launch, but there is something we're missing. As you can see, there's the engineer's report below, which tells us we're slightly over the mass limit. And there are two ways to fix that. Taking off some mass, so let's try that. Although we just have barely enough delta V to make it into orbit, and we're already cutting it really close. So I don't see where we could remove mass, but let's try it. Maybe those fins could go. I mean, that totally removes the aerodynamics, but maybe it's worth it. Alright, let's upgrade the buildings. So to remove the mass limit, you can upgrade the launch pad. That costs us 50,000 funds. And while we're at it, let's also upgrade the astronaut complex so that our Kerbals can take EVAs. So now we no longer have to contend with the mass limit. We can make some more modifications. Add a few more fuel tanks because we are cutting it really close on the delta V front. There we go, 4,195 meters per second. Seems like a nice safe delta V. Maybe another fuel tank just to be even safer. And our thrust to weight ratio is maybe a bit too high. No, that's an upper stage rocket. Maybe it's better we keep it fairly high. More high in the atmosphere, but more thrust is probably a good thing. Sort out the thrust limiters for the lower stages. And yeah, everything looks good. Check out our rocket a little bit. Now you might have noticed we aren't putting any signs on this vessel, and that is because we don't have that many parts. We need to save the parts for aerodynamics. So we've got some aerodynamic, put on some symmetry, add these aerodynamic parts back that we removed because of the mass limit. Center of lift is doing something funny. Oh, there's an extra fin. So let's fix that. We can put it on 4-way symmetry. And there we go. Now the center of lift is below the center of mass. And it cannot support over 30 parts. Which is why I said no signs. However, we can sort out the part limit by moving it to just 3 fins on the main stage, and that puts us exactly on the mark. So we cannot afford any signs on this mission. So this is going to be a contract completing mission. So here we are on the launch pad. Gonna check on our rocket, thrust to weight ratios. All good. SAS on, throttle up. And as you can see, we've already got a little bit of speed even though we aren't moving at all. And this is because Kerbal is moving. So Kerbal is rotating towards the east. So the most efficient direction to launch towards is the east, which is the 90-degree marker on the nav ball. So let's punch it, and off we go. And we're gonna start tilting slightly 90 degrees. Now, as you might have seen in the contract, we went straight, we were supposed to go escape the atmosphere and accelerate parallel to the surface. But the reason why we're doing it in a slight tilt like this is because Kerbal has an atmosphere, and going parallel to the planet immediately will cause a lot of drag and will actually make it more inefficient. Now here we are with our maneuver mode panel up, and we can keep an eye on our apoapsis. As soon as it gets above 80, we can cut throttle, and once we're above out of space, once we're in space, we can accelerate parallel to Kerbal and put ourselves in a nice circular orbit. So let's continue with the launch. And you might see this little yellow marker which I seem to be following. That is the prograde marker. And that is the direction where you're pointing. So to get into orbit, usually you follow the prograde marker and it moves correctly in such a way that you will end up with a circular orbit. So prograde is the direction you're going, and its opposite, as you will see later in the episode, is retrograde, which looks exactly the same but with lines. And we just staged. So our little orbiter is all by itself. And our apoapsis just entered space. And cut. So let's align ourselves such that we're right on the horizon, so that we can accelerate parallel to the surface. I might have told you this last episode, maybe I didn't. The blue is meant to be the sky and the brown is meant to be the ground. So that little white line in the middle, that would be accelerating parallel to the surface. So let's just wait until we're closer to our apoapsis. Otherwise, the further away we are from our apoapsis, we will send our apoapsis ballooning out. So if we don't want to end up with a 200 by 80 kilometer orbit, it would be better if we started as we were closer to 80 kilometers. So we've started burning, as you can see. Maybe a little bit early, but bit too early. Wait till a bit closer. And throttle up. And we can see our trajectory starting to balloon out into a circle. We'll just keep an eye on that apoapsis. If it gets too far away, we'll cut throttle and wait till we're closer. And you can see the prograde icon has come to join us. Our periapsis is out of Kerbin's surface, but it's still in the atmosphere, which means this isn't considered an orbit yet. Unfortunately, though, our apoapsis has pushed past 100, which is a bit too far out, so we will wait a little bit longer, get a bit closer to the apoapsis before we start burning again. Put ourselves right back on the horizon, and we can start burning again. Little bit, as you can see, not much, but it's still too close. Our periapsis is almost out of the atmosphere, but our apoapsis is getting pushed too far away. So wait a little bit longer. Now we will only need a very tiny burn to get ourselves fully out of the atmosphere. So we'll just perform that. Put ourselves on the horizon again. Throttle up ever so slightly, and now we're in an orbit. Our contract has gone green. So let's go to the Space Center and get ourselves a contract. So as this is a contract gathering mission, we need to make as much out of our one flight as possible. And as you can see, an Explore Kerbin has come. We need to perform a spacewalk in orbit of Kerbin. This is easy for us because we're still in orbit of Kerbin. So this is pretty much a free one. So let's go back to our ship. using the tracking station. Fly the vessel. And here's our vessel. So we will remove SAS for a while because since the engines aren't on, the only thing keeping the attitude the same is the reaction wheels, and they consume electricity. EVA JAB, we can take an EVA report. So while we didn't put on any science experiments on this mission, we still have EVA reports to take, and as you might have noticed, it said EVA report above Kerbin's water. They are biome specific, so you can take multiple ones over different regions of Kerbin. So while I do that, I'm just going to cut straight to the end of my science gathering mission. So here we are. EVA JEB one final time, get our last bit of EVA science, and then we will time warp till we are about 1/3 of an orbit away from the Kerbal Space Center so that we can land a bit closer. So we're time warping, but now would be a good time to do a quick save so that if you are too far away, for example, you can try again. So we'll just time warp a little bit closer. And actually there's one more thing we could do. Going back to the Space Center, there is yet another contract we can get hold of. You left enough fuel in the tanks to return, right? And yet another free contract. All they want us to do is return from orbit of Kerbin. So we just need to time warp a little bit further. Just wait a bit. SAS on, and we're gonna align ourselves with this icon that looks a lot like prograde, except it has an X in the middle, and that is retrograde, and that will bring our orbit back into the atmosphere. So we're going to increase throttle a little bit and cut throttle at around 24 kilometers. Normally 30 kilometers is what I like. However, we kind of time warped a little bit too far. We overcooked it, so that's why I made it go a little bit longer. Let the burn go out, and as you can see, we just decoupled our boosters and our parachutes are automatically armed. So all we're going to do is enter the atmosphere, and as soon as we hit the atmosphere, our time warp went off, and we can remove SAS since the capsule will automatically align itself retrograde. As you can see, it's automatically moving itself around the retrograde vector. We can check on the heat shield's ablator, which is what absorbs the heat. Honestly, to save mass, we could probably have removed most of that ablator since we don't need all of it. However, it's fine. It worked. So here we are, re-entering the atmosphere. If you want, you can time warp as well, since this does quickly get boring. We might be seeing a little bit of re-entry effects going on here in a little while, as soon as we get lower down into the atmosphere, and you can already see our periapsis entering back into the surface. And there are the re-entry heating effects, and our ablator is getting consumed. And now the ship is aligning itself to the retrograde icon completely automatically. I'm not providing any inputs at all. Alright, we kind of overcooked the burn a little bit. We are a little bit far away from the KFC, but to be honest, I don't really mind. If you would like, you can do it multiple times. I'll just stick with this one time. And our orbital speed is rapidly decreasing. We don't have much ablator. Well, we have a lot of ablator. We only lost a little bit. Some like 20 units of ablator. So I would recommend stopping time warp till your parachutes unfold, because that's one point where the game can get a bit glitchy and your parachutes might not unfold. So it's a good time to stop warping until your parachutes unfold, and then again right before they fully deploy, take off the time warp. And there we go, deployed, and now it should be fine. Time warp again, and we should be landing safely in the water. And as per time warping, EVA is unavailable for Jeb. And this is the science I managed to collect, not much. If you'd like to spend some more time in space, you can do that. Oh wait, we're time warping. Jeb can't EVA. And we can do a we're landed in the water again, which is someplace we've already been, so we can just recover. So here we are back in the Space Center. 50 science just from collecting EVA reports without any science equipment. So we can look at a few notes. We could get 45 science for the Terrier, which we want. And then out of the rest, there's not really something I've had my eye on. This would be nice for tourist contracts, in which you take a tourist up into orbit, etc. Aerodynamics, well, flights are something we'd get into later, and we can't afford any of those lower down nodes. We only have 68 science left. So I mean, this science is kind of tempting, this electrics, and so is the miniaturization, because it gives us the EVA science kit. However, I think we'll go with general construction. Has more parts, so we'll just get that. And as you can see, we have 401,000 funds, even though we had about 150 at this after we upgraded the buildings at the start of this video. So anyway, thank you all for watching. Please check out my blog, where I write about interesting things I love to do. And there's a few articles about Kerbal Space Program there as well. Thank you all for watching, and see you in the next episode. Bye!